The Deshaun Watson suspension is final. What the hell is going on with Tom Brady? I'm Joe Dolan, and this is the Fantasy Points Daily Lineup for Friday, August 19th, 2022.
It's time for the FantasyPoints.com Daily Lineup. Staying on top of the latest news and updates around the NFL. Rise and shine, folks. We're taking the field. Here's your host, FantasyPoints.com's Joe Dolan.
Starting at quarterback today, but not until week 13 in actual football, is Deshaun Watson. Watson and the NFL negotiated a disciplinary settlement stemming from his clear violation of the league's personal conduct policy and the dozens of sexual harassment lawsuits brought against him. Watson will be suspended for 11 games, will be fined $5 million, and per ESPN's Adam Schefter, must comply with evaluation and treatment recommendations of a third-party behavioral expert to be reinstated. His reinstatement is contingent upon his compliance with the treatment plan. If he doesn't comply, his reinstatement could be delayed, plus further discipline. Now, I would typically consider those reinstatements almost a formality, but given the lack of contrition that Watson was once again showing on Thursday once the suspension came down, maybe we shouldn't assume anything. Now, obviously, this whole thing is gross, and talking about it on a fantasy football show is even more gross. The suspension almost certainly isn't enough, but the fact of the matter is the NFL and Watson both wanted to avoid court and the big, scary discovery process. Making things more unbelievable, Watson will be first eligible to return in week 13 when, you guessed it, the Browns travel to Houston. You cannot make this garbage up. From an off-field perspective, and I cannot stress, an on-field perspective, and I cannot stress how little I want to talk about this right now, Watson will not have played a snap of regular season football in nearly 2 calendar years come the time he does take the field. But he's almost certain to be better than Jacoby Brissett, who will presumably fill in as the starter in Cleveland in the interim. Brissett averages under 200 passing yards per game in his 37 career starts. Browns general manager Andrew Berry, curiously, was asked about Brissett being his starter for most of the season or if the Browns will look elsewhere for a better option. Per SI's Albert Breer, his response was, quote, "We have a lot of confidence in Jacoby," end quote. He did not shut the door on adding more to the room, and it is most notable that Jimmy Garoppolo is still toiling around in San Francisco. Perhaps Barry doesn't want to waste a prime year of Amari Cooper, Nick Chubb, and Myles Garrett, among others. As for Watson, he's not draftable in the overwhelming majority of fantasy formats, and it's worth noting that his schedule down the stretch is tough. After the Texans, all of the Bengals, Browns, Saints, Commanders, and Steelers could have above average defenses. What's more, if you don't want to draft or roster Watson because fantasy football should be a fun and positive game, I have no qualms with that. At our first running back spot, the Jaguars are going to have their leading rusher by week 1. Coach Doug Peterson said Thursday that he expects James Robinson, who's coming off an Achilles tear, to be ready for week 1 against Washington, Cameron Wolfe of NFL Network reports. Robinson isn't going to play during the preseason more than likely, but he should have a role in the Jags offense early and often during the regular season. While Achilles tears used to be career enders for running backs, Cam Akers completely shattered the mold by returning in less than 6 months from his tear last season to play in the playoffs for the Rams. Robinson is now 7 months removed from his injury and will be 8 months removed come week 1, which really pretty much puts him on track with historical comps, per our Dr. Edwin Porras. Now, reporter John Shipley of Jags Report told us on our Franchise Focus podcast that the Jaguars really trust Robinson in pass protection, which could put a damper on Travis Etienne's passing down work. Etienne is a 3rd-round pick on Underdog Fantasy, while Robinson is going in the 12th round. Robinson's ADP has slowly risen since he returned to practice earlier this month, though. However, I've still been drafting Etienne. He looks excellent, and per Dr. Porras, from the limited video we've seen from camp, Robinson looks like someone who hasn't been able to run in 6 months. Nonetheless, this is Doug Peterson here. And a running back rotation does seem highly likely. ETN may well be priced at his ceiling, but damn it if I can't keep chasing upside. At our other running back spot, we move to the Big Apple, where Saquon Barkley is sick of it. The vibes out of Giants camp have gotten worse after a good start, mostly because quarterback Daniel Jones is reportedly struggling, and wide receiver Kadarius Toney, just like last year, can't get on the field. But one guy I have felt pretty good about all summer is Barkley. The new coaching staff seems intent on using him correctly, i.e. using his elite skills in space to get him more involved as a receiver. And Barkley has an Empire State-sized chip on his shoulder, as his press conference on Thursday proved. I've been playing this position for a very long time, and by no means am I the perfect running back, and I still got so much work to do, Barkley said, according to Pat Leonard of the New York Daily News. But, Barkley continued, I know there's been the conversation or been a thought or been a thing out there that said about me, he don't know what he's doing, he's just dancing back there. I'm really kind of fed up with people who've never played a position try to speak on how I run a position. We call them all pros with clickers in their hand. Running back is a tough position, but it's easy to be there and watch football and watch on TV or even watch on film and stop the clicker and say, oh, he should have made that cut. There's a lot of things that go into making that cut. There's a lot of things like your shoulders being square. There's a lot of things that have an impact on your vision, end quote. Yeesh. Hey, Saquon, as one of those all pros with a clicker in their hand, I've been all about drafting you this offseason. Why? First of all, the work ethic is legendary. We know that. Secondly, Brian Daboll is a massive improvement over sentient tree trunk Joe Judge. Thirdly, the Giants' offensive line might be one of the most improved units in the NFL. And finally, our Dr. Edwin Porras at Fantasy Points made a stellar medical case for Barkley earlier this offseason, thinking he should be far better 2 years removed from his torn ACL. Porras noted that Saquon was the RB9 in fantasy points per game last season over the first 4 weeks before a fluke injury when he stepped on a defender's foot. I'm in on Saquon as a second-round pick because I still think the league-busting upside is there, and he sure has the attitude for it. At our first wide receiver spot is one of the hardest receivers to cover in the league. The Eagles' Devonta Smith was practicing again Thursday. I wrote that in present tense. I'm not sure why. And hasn't had any setbacks with the groin injury that limited him last week, Josh Tolentino of the Philadelphia Inquirer reports. Tolentino observed from the Eagles' joint practices with the Browns that Smith, quote, has been open literally every rep. His footwork, breaks, pad level, body control, it's all been elite. He was heating up coming into Cleveland too. Smith then finished the practice with a good bit of trash talk against a former high school and college rival, Browns cornerback Richard LeCounte. It was an all-around dominant day for the Slim Reaper. He also impressed new teammate A.J. Brown, whose arrival has kind of stolen some of Smith's thunder from a fantasy perspective. I said it the first day I got here. His route running is special, Brown said of Smith. He showed that today. Now, personally, I've heard it on good authority, personally told by someone who would know, that NFL defensive coaches already consider Smith one of the hardest receivers to cover in the NFL. He is that good. Quote, people be pressing him. He does a little shimmy, and then he's like Casper the Ghost, tight end Dallas Goedert said of Smith. He's nowhere to be found. He's a special player, and I'm glad he's on my team. Now, it's hard to project him because the Eagles added A.J. Brown, and Jalen Hurts was fairly limited as a passer last year. But that's not a slight on Smith, the player, because he's likely going to be Pro Bowl level good on film this year. If Hurts progresses, and based on practice reports from this offseason, I'm positive he can, this could be a lot of fun to watch. Smith is a really good pick at his 7th round ADP. At our other wide receiver spot, we head to Indianapolis. I love me some Michael Pittman Jr. this year, and I've loved drafting him around the 3rd round in best ball drafts all summer. Based on training camp reports, I may be making a good move with that. According to the Indianapolis Star's Joel Erickson, Pittman and new quarterback Matt Ryan have found instant chemistry. Erickson writes that, from the start of training camp, he's been the new starter's number 1 target by far, hauling in 34 passes over 13 practices. The Lions could barely cover the Colts' number one receiver in the 2 joint practices the teams held together, Erickson writes. One day after making 3 catches against Detroit, Erickson continues, Pittman Jr. racked up 5 of Ryan's 9 completions. The Colts starter completed 9 of 12 passes on the day, including a pair of explosive plays over the middle that would have gone for 20 or more yards. Pittman Jr. also drew a clear pass interference over the middle in the 2-minute drill, beating a Lions cornerback so badly that a grab was his only recourse. But now, if you don't trust a Colts beat writer to tell you how good Pittman was in the sessions, will a Lions beat do? Because according to Colton Pouncey of The Athletic, who covers the Lions every day, my audience in particular should be interested. Pouncey writes, if you play fantasy football, I'd probably take a long look at Pittman. He looked terrific out there and carved up the Lions secondary all day. Not just in one-on-ones, but in the scrimmage portion too, Pouncey wrote. That is noted, Colton. Pouncey wrote that Pittman looked pretty good against Lions top CB Amani Oruwariye. He beat Oruwariye twice during one-on-ones, though one catch was flagged for offensive pass interference, and got him a few times in various scrimmage portions. To put a cherry on top of this whole thing, our Graham Barfield astutely pointed out this offseason that Matt Ryan has supported a fantasy wide receiver 1 by fantasy points per game in 13 of his 14 seasons in the NFL. I can't have enough Pittman in my best ball wallet. In our flex spot, I don't know what's going on with Tom Brady, okay? I don't. Coach Todd Bowles said Thursday that he doesn't have a definitive date for Brady rejoining the team from his absence for personal reasons, but isn't concerned about it. ESPN.com's Jenna Lane reports. Brady has been away from the team for close to 2 weeks for what Bowles described at the time as a scheduled personal absence that he and the team knew about beforehand. But as you might imagine, a player of Brady's status and caliber just leaving camp with no definitive return date is inviting all kinds of conspiracy theories. This situation was made for Reddit. Look, Brady doesn't need to practice. He's 45 and could probably diagnose a defense while standing on his head. But this is definitely getting into bizarre territory if it wasn't there already. The fact that Brady retired for all of 37 minutes earlier this offseason is just casting a pall over this absence. Now, in all likelihood, he'll be back out there in a week or two and will prepare the Bucs for a Super Bowl run. But until that does happen, we're going to get more and more nervous each day. I'm Joe Dolan, and this has been the Fantasy Points Daily Lineup. Head to fantasypoints.com for all your fantasy draft needs and use code LINEUP22 for an extra 10% off any package. By the way, our rookie prospect guide, including all of Greg Cosell's rookie evaluations and Wes Huber's Devy profiles, is already discounted a further 60% in celebration of the start of fantasy football season. It is a must-read for Dynasty players. I'll be back next Tuesday for another week of the Daily Lineup. Have a great weekend, everyone.